Grant Wilson's 2012 departure from ghost hunters wasn't about spending time with family like he claimed. It was network exploitation demanding fake evidence, financial betrayal by Jason Hawes, a demonic investigation that followed him home, health crisis sci-fi forced him to hide, and legal battles to escape his contract. Subscribe now because the real story involves pay disparity, staged evidence pressure, marriage collapse, and the investigation that almost destroyed him. The truth has been buried under NDA for 13 years. The family time excuse was just the cover story they allowed him to tell. In October 2012, Grant Wilson made a public announcement that sent shockwaves through the paranormal investigation community and devastated millions of Ghost Hunters fans who had followed his work since the show premiered on Sci-Fi in 2004. Standing alongside his co-founder Jason Hawes in what appeared to be a carefully scripted joint statement, Grant explained that he was departing Ghost Hunters after 8 successful seasons to focus on what he described as his top priority, spending quality time with his 3 young sons and being present for his family in ways that the demanding filming and investigation schedule had prevented for nearly a decade. On the surface, this explanation seemed entirely reasonable and even admirable to fans and media outlets covering the announcement. Grant had been traveling an estimated 200 to 250 days per year for 8 consecutive years, crisscrossing the country to investigate haunted locations ranging from private residences to massive asylum complexes, historic hotels, and infamous paranormal hotspots. This grueling schedule meant missing countless birthdays, school events, soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, and everyday family moments that fathers typically cherish and children need for healthy development. The narrative Grant presented was one of a dedicated father reaching a point where he recognized his children were growing up without him and making the difficult but necessary choice to prioritize family over career at the peak of professional success. However, for those paying close attention to the circumstances surrounding Grant's departure, rather than simply accepting the official explanation at face value, numerous red flags suggested something far more complicated and darker was happening behind the carefully managed public relations messaging. The timing of his exit was the first major inconsistency that raised questions among industry insiders and observant fans. Grant didn't announce his departure at the conclusion of a season when natural transition points occur and contracts typically expire, allowing for smooth succession planning and proper farewell episodes. Instead, he quit abruptly mid-season with only a few weeks' notice to production, creating immediate logistical chaos for filming schedules, investigation planning, and contractual obligations to locations that had been booked months in advance expecting the full TAPS team. The second red flag was visible in the final episodes featuring Grant that aired after his announcement but had been filmed weeks or months earlier. Careful viewers noticed that Grant appeared visibly uncomfortable, spoke minimally during team discussions, rarely interacted with Jason Hawes beyond absolutely necessary professional communication, and seemed emotionally detached from investigations in ways that contradicted his normally enthusiastic, engaged demeanor that had made him a fan favorite. Approximately 3 weeks before Grant Wilson submitted his resignation to Sci-Fi and informed Jason Hawes of his intention to leave Ghost Hunters permanently, the TAPS team conducted an investigation at an abandoned psychiatric hospital facility in central Massachusetts that has never been publicly identified, and whose footage was deemed too disturbing by network executives to ever air on television. According to individuals close to Grant who spoke confidentially about the experience years later after non-disclosure agreements expired, this investigation represented a psychological and spiritual breaking point that fundamentally altered Grant's perception of paranormal work and the dangers inherent in repeatedly exposing himself to locations housing malevolent entities. The psychiatric hospital had a documented history of patient abuse, unauthorized experimental treatments, and multiple deaths by suicide occurring within its walls during decades of operation before being condemned and abandoned in the 1990s. From the moment the team entered the facility for preliminary equipment setup, Grant reported experiencing overwhelming feelings of oppression, dread, and being watched by something intensely malevolent that seemed specifically focused on him rather than other team members. During the nighttime investigation, Grant was investigating a former patient isolation ward alone when he experienced what he later described in private conversations as a full demonic attack that involved physical sensations of being choked, extreme temperature drops localized around his body, and auditory phenomena including whispered threats in languages he didn't recognize. The experience was so traumatic that Grant called for immediate evacuation and refused to continue the investigation despite Jason and producers pressuring him to stay and capture more evidence. What made this incident truly devastating for Grant wasn't just the experience at the location itself, but what followed him home afterward. In the days and weeks following the psychiatric hospital investigation, Grant began experiencing disturbing phenomena at his own residence that terrified his family. He woke multiple mornings with unexplained scratches on his torso and arms that appeared overnight without any natural explanation. His children, particularly his youngest son, began reporting seeing shadow figures standing in doorways and at the foot of beds during nighttime hours. Grant suffered intense nightmares featuring the psychiatric hospital and patients who seemed to be trying to communicate warnings or threats. Most disturbing was the pervasive sense that something dark had attached itself to Grant and followed him home from Massachusetts, bringing malevolent energy into what should have been his family's safe sanctuary. Throughout 2011 and into 2012, tensions between Grant Wilson and Sci-Fi Network executives escalated dramatically over fundamental disagreements about the show's direction. The balance between genuine scientific investigation and manufactured entertainment drama, and the integrity of evidence presented to viewers as authentic paranormal phenomena. When Ghost Hunters premiered in 2004, the show distinguished itself from other paranormal programming through TAPS's commitment to skeptical, methodical investigation that debunked the majority of reported phenomena through natural explanations, while presenting the small percentage of genuinely unexplainable evidence with scientific objectivity. This approach resonated with audiences who were tired of sensationalized ghost shows, making extraordinary claims without rigorous analysis. However, as Ghost Hunters became one of Sci-Fi's highest-rated programs, generating substantial advertising revenue and building a dedicated fan base that supported merchandising and live event ticket sales, network executives began pushing aggressively for content changes designed to boost ratings through increased drama, conflict, and spectacular evidence captures, even if achieving these results required compromising investigative integrity. Producers began pressuring Grant and the team to emphasize interpersonal conflicts, manufacture disagreements about evidence interpretation, and present ambiguous findings as definitive proof of paranormal activity, rather than acknowledging uncertainty. Grant resisted these directives, arguing that TAPS had built its reputation on honesty and scientific rigor, and that betraying viewer trust by presenting fabricated drama or questionable evidence as genuine would ultimately destroy the credibility that made Ghost Hunters successful. The conflict reached a breaking point when Sci-Fi executives presented Grant and Jason with a proposed season finale script that included a staged physical altercation between the co-founders, where they would have a heated argument over evidence that escalates into pushing and shoving, creating dramatic tension and viral-worthy footage. Grant flatly refused to participate in this fabricated scene, stating that he would not deceive viewers by pretending to have conflicts that didn't exist, or by staging evidence disagreements for entertainment value. Network executives responded to Grant's refusal with thinly veiled threats about his future with the show, suggesting that investigators who weren't team players, willing to give producers the content they needed for ratings, success, might find themselves replaced by more cooperative personalities who understood that television was ultimately an entertainment business requiring certain creative liberties. Throughout the 8 years that Grant Wilson and Jason Hawes worked together as co-founders of TAPS and co-stars of Ghost Hunters, Grant operated under the fundamental assumption that their partnership was equal in every meaningful sense. Equal decision-making authority over investigations and team composition, equal creative input into show direction and episode content, and most importantly, equal financial compensation for the work they performed and the value they brought to the production. This assumption wasn't based on naive trust, but rather on explicit partnership agreements signed when TAPS was founded, and verbal assurances from Jason during contract negotiations with Sci-Fi that they would split all show-related income equally as partners who had built this enterprise together. However, in early 2012, Grant accidentally discovered documentation revealing that the financial arrangement he believed governed their partnership was far from the equal split he had been led to believe existed. During a production meeting at Sci-Fi offices where contracts and payment schedules were being discussed for the upcoming season, Grant happened to see accounting spreadsheets that were left on a conference table showing payment breakdowns for principal cast members. The numbers immediately struck Grant as wrong because the compensation listed for Jason Hawes was substantially higher, approximately 3 to 4 times larger, than the amounts Grant received for what he believed were equivalent roles. When Grant questioned the discrepancy, initially assuming it was an accounting error, he learned that Jason had negotiated separate compensation arrangements beyond their standard per-episode talent fees. These additional payments came through executive producer credits that entitled Jason to percentage points of profits, merchandising licensing agreements where Jason's name and likeness were licensed separately for products, personal appearance fees at conventions and events that weren't shared equally, and consulting fees paid by Sci-Fi for input on show development that Grant had been providing equally but wasn't receiving separate compensation for. The realization that for 8 years, while Grant believed they were making equal money as partners, Jason was actually receiving several times more income through these separate deals that Grant had never been informed about or offered participation in, felt like a devastating betrayal of their friendship and partnership. When Grant confronted Jason directly about the financial disparity and questioned why these arrangements had been hidden from him, Jason's response was that these were separate business opportunities he had pursued independently that weren't part of their TAPS partnership agreement. While Grant Wilson publicly cited family time as his reason for leaving Ghost Hunters, the deeper truth was that by the time he made his departure announcement in October 2012, his marriage had already collapsed under the relentless pressure of his paranormal investigation career, and he was actively navigating a painful divorce that would become final within months. The warning signs had been accumulating for years but reached a critical breaking point in early 2012 when Grant's wife, who had endured nearly a decade of essentially functioning as a single parent while her husband traveled 200+ days annually, issued an ultimatum that forced Grant to confront the unsustainable reality of trying to maintain both his Ghost Hunters career and his family relationships. The strain on Grant's marriage stemmed from multiple intersecting factors that compounded over time. The obvious issue was physical absence. Grant spent more nights per year in hotels near investigation locations than he spent sleeping in his own bed at home with his wife. This meant his wife managed school pickups and drop-offs, helped with homework, attended soccer games and school plays, handled discipline and parenting decisions, managed household repairs and emergencies, and navigated all the daily complexities of raising 3 young boys essentially alone while Grant was investigating haunted asylums across the country. Beyond mere absence, Grant's work created additional stresses that invaded their home life even during the limited time he was physically present. The paranormal experiences Grant encountered during investigations didn't always stay at the locations being investigated. As detailed in the psychiatric hospital incident and numerous other cases, Grant occasionally brought home spiritual attachments or negative energy that manifested as unexplained phenomena in the family residence. His wife reported feeling uncomfortable in their own home, experiencing cold spots and unexplained sounds, and most distressingly, their children began reporting seeing shadow figures and experiencing nightmares after particularly intense investigations Grant returned from. The psychological toll extended beyond paranormal phenomena to include Grant's emotional unavailability even when physically present. The stress of constant travel, the lack of normal sleep patterns, the accumulated trauma from witnessing disturbing locations and experiencing frightening phenomena, and the pressure of performing for cameras while maintaining investigative integrity left Grant mentally exhausted and emotionally distant. His wife described feeling like she was living with a stranger during his brief periods home, someone who was physically present but psychologically absent, unable to engage fully with family life because he was always mentally preparing for the next investigation or recovering from the previous one. By 2011 and into 2012, Grant Wilson was experiencing serious health problems that directly resulted from 8 years of investigating toxic, dangerous locations without adequate safety equipment or proper medical protocols, combined with the chronic stress of maintaining an unsustainable filming schedule that prioritized production deadlines over personal well-being. The health issues manifested across multiple systems in Grant's body, creating a cascade of medical concerns that doctors warned were putting him at significant risk for life-threatening complications if he didn't make immediate and dramatic lifestyle changes. The most acute problem involved respiratory issues that developed from repeated exposure to mold, asbestos, lead paint dust, and other airborne contaminants present in the abandoned buildings, derelict hospitals, and condemned structures that ghost hunters investigated regularly. Grant began experiencing persistent coughing, shortness of breath during physical exertion, and recurring respiratory infections that required multiple rounds of antibiotics to clear. Pulmonary function tests revealed measurable decline in lung capacity, and his physician explicitly warned that continued exposure to toxic environments without proper respiratory protection equipment would cause permanent lung damage that could affect his quality of life for decades. Beyond respiratory concerns, Grant developed severe chronic fatigue and immune system dysfunction that his doctors attributed to years of disrupted sleep patterns, constant travel across time zones, inadequate nutrition while filming on location, and the relentless stress of performing under production pressure while maintaining investigative standards. Grant's immune system became so compromised that he caught every cold and flu virus circulating, took weeks to recover from illnesses that healthy adults shake off in days, and developed recurring skin infections that suggested his body's natural defenses had been worn down to dangerous levels. Most alarming from a long-term health perspective were the anxiety and panic attacks that began occurring with increasing frequency during 2011 and 2012. Grant, who had always prided himself on maintaining calm professionalism during investigations regardless of how frightening the phenomena encountered, started experiencing episodes of overwhelming panic, rapid heartbeat, chest tightness, and difficulty breathing that would strike without warning during investigations or even during routine daily activities. A cardiologist who evaluated Grant after one particularly severe episode that sent him to an emergency room ran comprehensive cardiac testing and delivered a sobering assessment. Grant's chronic stress levels, elevated cortisol, high blood pressure, and anxiety symptoms were putting him at significantly elevated risk for heart attack or stroke before age 45 if he didn't make immediate changes to reduce stress exposure. By 2011 and into 2012, the internal dynamics within the TAPS team had deteriorated significantly from the collegial, mission-driven organization that Grant Wilson and Jason Hawes had founded years earlier with the stated purpose of conducting serious, scientific paranormal investigation that prioritized evidence integrity over entertainment value or personal gain. The fractures within the team stemmed from multiple sources of tension that had been building gradually, but reached breaking points that made Grant question whether he could continue working with people who no longer shared his fundamental values about investigative methodology and ethical standards. Steve Gonsalves and Dave Tango, who had been with TAPS since the early days and appeared regularly on Ghost Hunters as tech specialists and investigators, harbored growing resentment that despite carrying substantial investigative workload and developing loyal fan followings that contributed to the show's success, they had virtually no decision-making authority over case selection, investigation strategies, or team direction. All major decisions flowed through Grant and Jason as co-founders, leaving Steve and Dave feeling like skilled employees rather than valued partners even after years of dedication to TAPS and the show. This resentment occasionally surfaced in passive-aggressive behavior, resistance to Grant's investigative instructions, and complaints to producers about being underutilized or undervalued. The situation was further complicated by newer team members who had been hired not through TAPS's traditional recruitment based on investigative skills and commitment to scientific methodology, but rather through Sci-Fi's casting process that prioritized personalities who would create good television drama and follow producer directions over investigators who might resist network pressure to manufacture content. These network-selected team members understood that their continued employment depended on pleasing producers and delivering the dramatic moments and evidence captures that boosted ratings, creating fundamental conflicts of loyalty and methodology within the team. The breaking point for Grant came during an investigation where he discovered that certain team members had been staging evidence, deliberately creating sounds, moving objects, or manipulating equipment to produce false positive readings, because they felt pressure from producers to deliver exciting evidence that would justify the episode and secure their positions on future investigations. When Grant confronted these individuals and brought the evidence fabrication to Jason's attention, expecting immediate dismissal of anyone compromising TAPS's investigative integrity, he was shocked by Jason's response, suggesting they handle it quietly without making it a major issue. When Grant Wilson made the personal decision that he needed to leave Ghost Hunters to protect his health, save what remained of his family relationships, and escape an increasingly toxic work environment that had strayed far from the investigative integrity that originally motivated his paranormal research, he discovered that actually extricating himself from the show would be far more complicated than simply submitting a resignation letter and walking away. Grant's employment relationship with Ghost Hunters was governed by complex contracts that he had signed years earlier during initial negotiations when the show was first being developed, followed by multiple contract extensions and renewals that occurred as the show's success grew and Sci-Fi invested more heavily in production. When Grant reviewed these contracts with his attorney in early 2012 after deciding he needed to quit, he discovered concerning language in the fine print that he either hadn't fully understood during original signing or that had been added during subsequent renewals without him recognizing the implications. Specifically, Grant learned that his most recent contract renewal, which he had signed during Season 7 negotiations, contained automatic extension clauses that bound him to the show for longer than he realized. Under these contractual provisions, Grant couldn't simply quit Ghost Hunters when he personally decided he was done. He was legally obligated to continue appearing on the show, participating in investigations, and fulfilling production requirements through specific dates that extended well beyond the time frame he had mentally committed to. When Grant informed Sci-Fi executives and production company representatives that he intended to leave the show despite the contractual obligations, their initial response was absolute refusal to release him from his agreement. Network lawyers sent formal letters reminding Grant of his contractual commitments and warning that walking away from the show before his contract expired would constitute material breach of agreement, exposing him to substantial financial liability. The threatened damages weren't merely symbolic. Sci-Fi indicated they could sue Grant for multi-million-dollar amounts representing lost advertising revenue, production costs for episodes that would need to be canceled or restructured, and damages to the show's brand value from losing one of its two co-stars and co-founders. These legal threats created an impossible situation where Grant felt trapped in a job that was destroying his health, had already cost him his marriage, and required him to continue working with people he no longer trusted while maintaining public pretense that everything was fine. Grant walked away from $500,000 plus annual income, lost his friendship with Jason, sacrificed platform and influence, faced financial struggles during divorce, endured public criticism from fans who felt abandoned. But he gained, rebuilt relationship with his sons, health improved dramatically within a year, rediscovered passion for investigation without network pressure, maintained integrity by refusing to fake evidence, and his 7-year absence made his 2019 return to Ghost Hunters on his own terms more powerful. Leaving was the best decision of his life, even though it was the hardest.